Tonight on Sayers and Secrets, the city's quiet respectability cracks open to reveal something far darker. A judge lies dead, a secret chamber breathes beneath his home, and Nero Wolfe must untangle a web of corruption written not in blood, but in ink. As Archie Goodwin follows the trail through polished offices and trembling consciences, every clue turns the mirror back on justice itself. So pour yourself a drink, lean into the shadows, and listen closely. Because in this case, the truth was hidden behind the very doors sworn to protect it. Let's begin the mystery. The doorbell started its argument with the rain at exactly 11:20. I was on my way to the kitchen to see if Fritz had any leftover custard when the sound cut across the house like a bad idea. Wolfe, from the office, growled, "Confound it, Archie. See who intends to intrude at this hour." I swung the door open on a man who looked as if he had been practicing disapproval for 40 years and finally won a medal for it. His umbrella drooped like a defeated flag, and his coat carried a courthouse odor, varnish, wet paper, and old authority. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, confirming he knew the territory. "I'm Judge Armitage." He didn't offer a hand. Men who pronounce their titles first rarely do. I led him in, watching rain follow us only as far as the mat. Wolfe didn't rise naturally. He had positioned his bulk behind the desk with the patience of a continent waiting for erosion. "Judge," he said, "you have left the bench for my doorstep. That implies distress. Please sit, if you can tolerate comfort." The judge eased himself into the red chair like a man testing a witness. "Mr. Wolfe, I need a discretion that exceeds the limits of law. Something within your private jurisdiction." I closed the door, took my usual chair, and kept my notebook ready. The judge's eyes drifted toward it and then away. He'd already decided to resent it later. "There has been an incident," he began. "Not murder, not yet. But a discovery that could destroy a reputation built over 50 years. Yours," Wolfe stated. "Indirectly." Fritz arrived with beer for Wolfe and nothing for the rest of us. The bubbles climbed lazily, like they knew they were part of the hierarchy. Armitage leaned forward. "I have a house in Westchester. My late wife kept a sewing room there. Locked since her death 8 years ago. Last week my housekeeper persuaded me to open it for cleaning. Behind one of the panels, we found a concealed door. Inside was a small room, bare walls, a single chair, and a heavy table with what looks like judicial ledgers from the 1930s. But the names in them, they aren't court cases. They're personal. Mine, my colleagues, our families, paired with sums of money." He paused. Rain traced the windows like handwriting, trying to stay polite. "Forgery?" I asked. "Too exact," he said, "and too informed. Each entry corresponds to an actual decision or favor from that year. Whoever kept those ledgers knew everything about us, including transactions that never reached daylight." Wolfe's eyelids lowered to half-mast. "You suggest blackmail. Yet the keeper of this archive, if such, is long silent." "I suggest something worse," said Armitage. "Someone recently entered that room. Dust patterns don't rearrange themselves. I locked it again and came straight here." Wolfe tapped his fingertips together, cathedral slow. "And you request that you find who built that room, who now visits it, and whether my past is about to be retried in public." Wolfe breathed once, deeply enough to threaten his chair. "The law of secrecy, Mr. Goodwin, is more intricate than the law of evidence. We will examine this room tonight." That was Wolfe for thunder at noon. I raised an eyebrow. "You leaving the brownstone after supper, sir?" "Don't be absurd. You will go." "With Mr. Saul Panzer." Armitage's mouth tightened. "Discretion, Mr. Wolfe. I can't have police or press." "You shall have neither," Wolfe cut in. "But you must have honesty. Whatever you concealed decades ago may return in another man's handwriting." The judge stood, heavier now with his own secrets. "Find who entered that room, and find them before Monday's session. By then, rumors may walk into court without counsel." He left his card and a faint odor of wet rulings behind him. When the door shut, Wolfe looked at me as if I'd already been deputized by hell. "Archie," he said, "have Saul meet you at the garage. You will inspect that hidden chamber, and if you find what I suspect you might—" "Yes, sir?" "Lock it again. From the inside." The cab's tires whispered over wet asphalt as we crossed the bridge out of Manhattan. Saul Panzer sat beside me, hat brim low, rain sliding down the window like nervous handwriting. The judge's card in my pocket felt heavier than his conscience, which I was beginning to suspect was no featherweight either. "Wolfe said we're going tonight," I told him. "A hidden room, a list of sins, and a judge who looks like he's been cross-examined by his own breakfast." Saul gave a low grunt. The kind that thinks discretion means burying the body twice. The man had a way of summarizing that could put the Constitution in a haiku. We turned into Westchester an hour later, trees sagging with the kind of rain that doesn't bother to end, just takes breaks to reload. Armitage's estate wasn't the Gothic sprawl I'd pictured, more colonial brick and tidy hedges, a place that said retired integrity. The porch light glowed like a reluctant alibi. The housekeeper who opened the door looked built for silence, tall grey hair pinned hard enough to stop clocks. She gave me the once-over and didn't approve of what she saw, which was mutual. "The judge said you were expected," she said, "but he retired early. The key to the sewing room is here." She handed me a ring that clinked like a confession. "We'll be quiet," I told her. "I doubt it," she said, and vanished toward the back hall, her shoes whispering revenge on the carpet. Saul and I moved upstairs, following the smell of sealed air. The sewing room was at the end of the corridor, its door older than the paint around it. I unlocked it and stepped into a tomb of thread and forgotten daylight. Dust motes danced in the lamplight as I swung the beam of my flashlight across the room. Everything had been left exactly where a life had stopped. The chair still tucked under a work table, a spool of white cotton waiting for a hem that never came. Saul found the panel first. "Here." His voice was soft, but the wood answered with a hollow tone. We pried it open, and the wall blinked at us. Thin outline of a door, nearly invisible, the paint faded just enough to whisper its secret. Behind it, the air changed. Cooler, heavier. I stepped in. The room was small, square, maybe 10 feet each way. There was a table, a single chair, and stacks of ledgers arranged with military neatness. The place smelled of old ink and Judgment Day. Saul moved his flashlight across the table. "You said ledgers?" "Plural," I said, flipping one open. "Names, dates, numbers. Looks like a very private audit." He leaned closer. "Armitage, Calloway, Gentry. Those are judges from the old circuit court." I turned another page. Amounts in the thousands. No currency mark, but the handwritings— I squinted. Deliberate, not feminine, not casual. Someone who liked letters standing at attention. Saul whistled through his teeth. "Weird part is this ink. See the oxidation? Not 30 years old. Maybe 3. That settled one thing. Either the dead came back to update their accounts, or someone alive was keeping the record current. We checked the rest of the room, walls, floor, even the underside of the table. On the baseboard near the corner, I found a fresh scratch. Tiny, clean metal on wood. "Tool mark," I said. "Someone opened this recently. Maybe the same visitor who left new ink on the ledgers." Saul nodded toward the floor. "No footprints. Maybe they cleaned up, or maybe they floated." He gave me a look that would have cracked dry paint. We backed out, careful not to disturb more dust than we had to. I locked the panel again, dropped the keyring in my pocket, and took one last glance at the sewing table. There was a folded scrap of paper near the spool of thread, new by the color of the fold. I picked it up. It read, in neat typewriter font. Every judge builds his own prison. Some are smaller than others. No signature. No date. I pocketed it and we left, letting the rain mop up behind us. In the cab back, Saul broke the silence. Think the judge wrote that. Too poetic. He looks like a man who uses semicolons as weapons, not art. Someone's playing him, or warning him. By the time we hit the city, Wolfe's brownstone was still lit, his silhouette framed by the study window like a monument to digestion. I hung my coat, shook off the rain, and went in. He was waiting with the patience of a chessboard. "You've seen it?" he asked. "Seen it, sniffed it, and nearly sneezed on it. There's a hidden room full of ledgers that could ruin the state judiciary, and someone's been updating them." "Describe the script." "Tight cursive, masculine, precise. Ink's fresh." He absorbed that, lids lowering. "Then it is not relic but rehearsal. Someone means to revive the past in performance." "Encore justice," I said. "Judge Armitage will love that." "Did you bring evidence?" I slid the scrap of paper across the desk. Wolfe read it, his lip folding over the lower one like it wanted privacy. "Quaint," he murmured. "Archie, the author of that note writes with philosophical malice. It is less a threat than a creed." He reached for his beer and took a solemn pull, the foam catching his mustache like punctuation. "What's our next step?" I asked. "You will return the key to the judge at 9 tomorrow. Do not mention the note. Observe him when you speak of the ledgers. His reaction will determine whether he fears exposure or invention. And if someone else fears him first, then," Wolfe said, "we may expect another visit, possibly from the dead." That line could have chilled Fritz's custard, but I kept my face straight. I'd seen cases begin with less poetry and end with more graves. Wolfe turned his eyes on me, steady as the weight of the room. "Archie, be discreet, but not too discreet." Meaning, be visible enough to attract whoever entered that room. I would like to see if conscience has developed a schedule. I nodded. "You want bait, you got it, but I'll need one of Saul's spare nets." He grunted, which in Wolfe meant blessing. When I went upstairs that night, the rain hadn't stopped, just learned to whisper. Somewhere in Westchester, a hidden room waited behind its new lock, full of ghosts that still knew how to write. And I had the feeling at least one of them had my name in his next chapter. The next morning didn't bother pretending it would be cheerful. The rain had switched from sermon to drizzle, the sky a dull courtroom ceiling. Wolfe had already installed himself behind his desk, working on his breakfast as if the eggs were witnesses refusing to cooperate. Fritz hovered near the door, straightening the silver tray with the reverence of a man aligning relics. I was adjusting my tie, ready to head out to return the judge's key. Wolfe didn't look up when he said, "Remember, Archie, observation is most productive when the subject believes he is not being observed." I'll try to look like a delivery boy with an Ivy League vocabulary. I told him, "You will. Look," he said evenly, "like yourself. That is usually sufficient camouflage for deceit." It wasn't a compliment, but in Wolfe's lexicon it came close. I pocketed the note again and started for the door. Westchester looked even grimmer in daylight. The road to the Armitage estate was slick with last night's regrets. When the housekeeper opened the door, her lips set a new standard for disapproval. "The judge is in the library," she said. "I bet he is," I said, and walked in. The library was all dark wood, high shelves, and the air of someone who liked books but hated reading. Armitage sat at a massive desk that made him look smaller than he deserved. He turned when I entered, his eyes already framed with the fatigue of someone who had spent the night thinking about headlines. "You returned quickly," he said. "I deliver faster than subpoenas," I told him, laying the key ring on the desk. "Your secret room is locked again, but someone's been keeping house in there." He froze, the way men do when they try to act like they don't understand English. "Explain." "The ledgers. Ink's fresh. Less than a month old. Someone's been updating your sins. He half stood, then sank back, the chair sighing under him. Impossible. No one else knew of that room. Maybe someone knew about the house. That narrows it down to everyone who's worked for you in 10 years. His gaze drifted toward the window, where the drizzle kept pretending to be discreet. The housekeeper's been with me 12 years. Devoted. Reliable. That's what the obituaries always say, I offered. He ignored it. My son was here last week. He's a lawyer. He would never... No, he wouldn't even enter that room. Did he know it existed? No. Then I'd cross him off the list of suspects who could find it. He rubbed his temples. Mr. Goodwin, these ledgers, if they were ever made public, they'd make the gossip columns look like hymnals, I said. But you didn't call Wolfe just to verify a cleaning issue. Somebody's using that room for a reason. The question is whether they're aiming at you or someone else. He looked up sharply. What do you mean? Those names in the books, judges, lawyers, officials. That's a guest list for professional panic. Whoever's maintaining them might want leverage. Or vengeance. Vengeance? He almost whispered it like he was trying to remember what it meant. I nodded toward his desk. You ever make an enemy in your line of work? He gave a sound that wasn't quite laughter. Mr. Goodwin, I've sentenced men to prison for lesser offenses than ambition. That was honest enough to chill the air a degree. I left him there, promising Wolfe I'd report back at noon. The housekeeper reappeared as I reached the door. Her eyes were steady, the gray in her hair gleaming like wire. The judge doesn't need further upset, she said. Then tell him to stop collecting secrets, I replied, stepping out onto the porch. The rain had turned thin again, like a whispering clerk. I was halfway to the car when I saw the boy. He was maybe 17, waiting across the drive under an elm tree, pretending to study the mailbox. When I opened the car door, he turned quick, started walking the other way. Too quick. I called out, "Hey, pal, you collecting stamps or spying on the mail?" He didn't answer, so I followed him halfway down the drive. His shoes splashed in shallow puddles, and his coat collar hid most of his face. "Hold it," I said, stepping around him. "Private property." He stopped. There was defiance under his hair, but also fear. A combination I'd seen often enough to know which side usually wins. "I didn't do anything," he said. "You're from the city. You don't belong here." "That makes two of us," I said. "Who sent you?" He shook his head, eyes darting past me toward the house. "Nobody. I just heard about the judge's secret room." That made my eyebrows dance. "Did you now? And what fairy whispered it in your ear?" He swallowed. "It's not a secret. People talk. They say the judge's wife didn't die natural. They say he sealed that room because of her." That was new. "Who's they?" He glanced down the lane. "You'll find out." Then he bolted. I let him go. Chasing teenagers in dress shoes is for amateurs and saints. I made a note in my pocketbook and headed back to the brownstone. Wolfe was where I'd left him, preserving inertia for the Smithsonian. When I walked in, he looked up just enough to register disappointment that I hadn't brought a criminal in my pocket. "Well," he said, "Judge Armitage is either terrified or rehearsing for it. Someone's been writing in those ledgers within weeks. And I met a kid near his place who claims the wife didn't die natural. Apparently, the room was hers." That earned a lift of Wolfe's eyebrows. How imaginative the idle mind becomes when deprived of employment. Nevertheless, tell me precisely what he said. I repeated it. Wolfe closed his eyes. "If rumor supplies motive, then gossip may preface murder." "I thought you didn't believe in coincidence," I said. "I don't, which is why you will contact Mr. Kramer." I blinked. "We're inviting the law in already." "I will not invite him," Wolfe said. "You will bump into him. Casually. Mention that a judge fears scandal. If he reacts, we will have context. If he feigns ignorance, we will have confirmation. Confirmation of what? That the threat concerns more than one man's conscience. He reached for his beer again, the gesture neat as a signature. And Archie, he added, speak also with the boy. I didn't get his name. You will. Your talent for conversation should suffice when vocabulary fails. I grinned. Meaning, charm him, until he tells me who's pulling his strings. Precisely. But avoid overt menace. A frightened witness tells lies. An interested one tells stories. I prefer stories. He closed his eyes, signaling dismissal. I took the note from my pocket and laid it on his blotter again. The handwriting on that paper looked new too. I want Saul to check the typewriter match. See if the ribbon's been changed recently. Very good. Do so. And Archie, yeah. If the boy was correct about Mrs. Armitage's death, we may soon find the past proving more alive than the present. I left him there, the rain ticking against the window like a stenographer keeping score. Somewhere between a dead wife, a hidden room, and a judge whose secrets were breeding in the dark, somebody was writing the next chapter. This time, I intended to read it before the ink dried. I had just reached for my hat when the phone rang, a sharp single note that had learned patience from Wolfe. I snatched it before Fritz could appear with a napkin. Goodwin speaking. The voice that came through was male, mid-level confidence, the kind of tone you hear when someone wants to sound official but not involved. Is this Nero Wolfe's assistant? That depends. If it's about unpaid invoices, he's my landlord. If it's about crime, he's my employer. This is Lieutenant Kramer, the voice said, and the static didn't hide the gravel. And I'm guessing you know why I'm calling. I leaned against the desk, catching Wolfe's glance as he looked up, unamused. Couldn't say, Lieutenant. I've already committed my weekly quota of suspicions. Kramer snorted. Don't get cute. You were at Judge Armitage's place last night. Care to explain why the judge's housekeeper phoned the county sheriff this morning, claiming she found him dead in his library? That rearranged the furniture in my head faster than Fritz after a spill. Dead? Shot once, left temple, gun on the desk. Sheriff thinks suicide. I don't. Get Wolfe to call me before he gets clever. He hung up. Wolfe's eyebrows had climbed to mid-alpine. Trouble. Armitage has retired permanently. Bullet through the temple. The local laws calling it suicide. Kramer's not buying it. Wolfe's mouth flattened into a shape that could have been disgust or vindication. Phooey. A man who fears exposure does not summon a detective for concealment one evening and then end his life the next morning. It lacks sequence. Unless someone accelerated his decision-making. He closed his eyes. Archie. Retrieve Mr. Panzer. We go to Westchester. I blinked. We go? His chin tilted, monumental. The convenience of remaining seated is outweighed by the need for direct observation. That was as close as Wolfe ever came to heroism. Within 20 minutes, Fritz had loaded his coat, hat, umbrella in the precise irritation he reserved for leaving the brownstone. Saul met us at the curb, hat dripping. The drive up felt like escorting a reluctant monarch. Wolfe grunted each time the car hit a bump. When we reached the Armitage estate, the driveway was cordoned off with county tape, and 2 uniforms guarded the porch like extras in a morality play. Kramer was there, raincoat unbuttoned, cigar clamped at the wrong end of patience. Well, if it isn't His Majesty, he said when Wolfe emerged, umbrella spreading like a black proclamation. Wolfe merely inclined his head. Lieutenant, may we view the body? Kramer hesitated. You're technically a civilian. I am technically necessary, Wolfe said. That won him entry. Inside, the air still carried the echo of gunpowder and furniture polish. The library looked smaller with its owner missing life. Armitage sat slumped sideways in his chair, his right hand dangling, revolver on the floor. The entry wound was neat, the exit wound mercifully hidden. Kramer gestured toward the desk. No note. Gun's his, registered. Powder burns on his right hand, though too faint for certainty. No sign of struggle. Housekeeper found him at 9 sharp. I looked around. The bookshelves were untouched. On the blotter lay last night's keyring and a single folded sheet of paper. Mind? I asked. Kramer sighed. Go ahead. You'll tell Wolfe anyway. I unfolded it. Typed again. Same font as the note from the sewing room. Justice is never blind, only selective. Wolfe exhaled, deep as the Atlantic. You see, Lieutenant? The author continues his correspondence. Kramer scowled. You're saying this was planted? I'm saying the judge's hand did not write it. The mechanism of his death may have been contrived to suggest despair, but despair does not compose aphorisms. Kramer grunted. You got suspects? 4, Wolfe said calmly. The housekeeper, his son, whoever keeps those ledgers current, and whoever killed Mrs. Armitage, if indeed she was killed. Kramer's cigar stopped mid-chew. Who said she was? Archie encountered rumor, which is often the shadow of truth. Kramer turned to me. You and your gossip sources again. I collect what's available, I said. Some kid mentioned it. Thought the wife didn't die natural. Name? Didn't give one. Kramer waved a hand. Find him. I'll keep the judge under wraps till the coroner sings. Wolfe was studying the desk surface. He touched a small indentation near the inkwell. Archie. Yeah. Note the faint circular mark. Coffee cup. Recently removed. Yet the housekeeper claims she found him at 9. A man intending suicide seldom troubles himself with breakfast beverages. Kramer snorted. So maybe he wasn't planning to die when he drank it. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. Therefore, he had company. We went through the rest. Window latch untouched, rug corners flat, nothing stolen. The only thing new was absence. The ledgers were gone. When I opened my mouth, Wolfe beat me to it. Our phantom curator has harvested his crop. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You mean those books you told me about? They were in a secret room. Yes, concealed behind a panel in the sewing room, Wolfe said. They chronicled certain improprieties among the bench. They are now conspicuously missing. Kramer's hand went to his hat brim. You think someone killed him for those records? I think someone killed him because they were through with him, Wolfe said. We left under a gray noon that hadn't decided whether to drizzle or cry. Saul drove back, silent except for the tires and Wolfe's occasional growl when the car lurched. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe went straight to his chair as if gravity had been waiting for him. Archie, he said, eyes closed, list all individuals with access to that house in the past 48 hours. I flipped open my notebook. Judge Armitage, the housekeeper, his son, maybe the kid, though he was outside, and whoever handled those ledgers recently. Add to them whoever knew of the room's existence before last week, Wolfe said. The wife, certainly. Perhaps the architect. He opened his eyes, brown and slow as syrup. Call Saul's contact at records. Obtain Mrs. Armitage's death certificate and coroner's report. I want dates, attending physician, and cause of death. I nodded. And the kid? Find him. Offer money if you must. His presence near the property implies surveillance, not curiosity. What do I tell him when he asks who I'm working for? Tell him truthfully. A man who dislikes being bored. Wolfe reached for his beer, cracked the cap with an ease that would shame a corkscrew, and took a deliberate sip. You believe it's connected, then? I asked. I believe, he said slowly, that someone is writing an indictment the law cannot issue. The judge's death was the first sentence. He waved me off, but his voice followed, quiet and heavy. Archie, prepare for visitors. When fear travels, it travels quickly. The next to knock will not bring confession, but protection. I didn't argue. I just checked the lock on the front door and made sure the revolver in the drawer was loaded. If justice had decided to move in next door, I wanted to be ready when it started redecorating. The doorbell proved Wolfe's prophecy correct before I'd finished checking the revolver. One chime, measured, civilized, and just desperate enough to make Fritz hurry from the kitchen. Wolfe didn't bother looking up. He just muttered, "Our next petitioner has arrived." Do admit the embodiment of panic, Archie. I opened the door on Judge Armitage's son. He was in his 30s, tall enough to make a necktie feel like an accessory rather than a necessity, and carried the kind of grief that hadn't yet decided whether to collapse or fight. His raincoat dripped onto the tile like punctuation marks on bad news. Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I need to see Mr. Wolfe. It's about my father." "He's the man behind the desk who looks like he's auditioning for Mount Rushmore," I said. "Come on in." He crossed the threshold, removing his hat as though entering a church. Wolfe regarded him with the mild impatience of a man who disapproved of tragedy interrupting lunch. "You are Mr. Armitage's son," Wolfe said. "Condolences are insufficient, but customary. Accept them." "Thank you," the son said, voice tight. "But I didn't come for condolences. I came because what they're saying, about him, it's impossible. My father didn't take his own life." "Agreed," Wolfe said without blinking. The man looked startled. "You agree?" "Yes. Suicide requires agency, not arrangement. Your father's death was arranged. Sit, please." He sat, the chair creaking under both his weight and what he was carrying. I stayed standing, notebook ready. "You saw him last when?" Wolfe asked. "Yesterday afternoon. I stopped by the house after work. We talked briefly about a case he'd been following, an old appeal he regretted denying. He seemed tired, but not distraught." "Did he mention the discovery of the hidden room?" The man's eyes flickered, a muscle tightening near his jaw. "No." "What hidden room?" I exchanged a glance with Wolfe. "Your father engaged us to examine certain documents found in a concealed chamber behind his late wife's sewing room," Wolfe said. "Ledgers, apparently chronicling payments and favors between members of the judiciary. They have since vanished." The man stared. "You're saying he had records of bribery?" "Records of something," I said. "We're still figuring out what flavor of sin was being catalogued." He rubbed his temple. "I can't believe it. My father was stern, yes, but incorruptible. He used to say integrity wasn't a virtue, it was insurance." Wolfe grunted. "How quaint. Yet insurance, when paid too often, invites investigation. Did your mother ever allude to any such matters?" "My mother?" He blinked. "She died suddenly. A heart seizure, they said. I was in college. There was no suspicion." "No suspicion," Wolfe repeated, "is a convenient diagnosis." The son shifted in his chair. "Why would someone kill my father? If those ledgers existed, wouldn't he be as much a victim as anyone they implicated?" "That depends," Wolfe said, folding his hands, "on whether he was the author or the audience." That one landed. The young man's mouth tightened, but he didn't deny it. I asked, "Anyone else close to your father? Visitors? Friends?" He hesitated. "Only his secretary, Miss Lenore Case. She's been with him since his appointment to the bench. Efficient, discreet, loyal." "Admirable trinity," I said. "Where is she now?" "Home, I think. She called me this morning, hysterical. Said the police questioned her briefly." "Get her here," Wolfe said. The son blinked. "Now?" "Yes, now. You may use our telephone." He obeyed. His voice on the line was steady, professional even, until the end. "Please, Miss Case. It's important. Come to 9 Waite, West 35th. I'll explain everything." He hung up, face pale. "She'll come?" "Good," Wolfe said. "Archie, note that the son did not ask what we intend to explain. Curiosity implies guilt. Trust implies ignorance. For the moment, he remains the latter." The son looked from one to the other of us. You think she's involved? I think, Wolfe said, that loyalty and secrecy make dangerous neighbors. Fritz entered quietly with beer, the foam sliding like diplomacy. Wolfe sipped, watching the door. The son waited, twisting his hat brim into a memorial wreath. 15 minutes later, the bell sounded again. I opened it to a woman whose poise had been recently evicted by fear. She was in her early 40s, impeccably dressed, but her eyes carried the raw shine of sleeplessness. Miss Lenore Case? I asked. Yes. Mr. Goodwin? Right this way. Wolfe's the large gentleman in charge of sanity. She entered, glanced once at the son, and stopped short. I thought you said— Please, Wolfe interrupted. Sit. The floor is rarely more enlightening. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, white-knuckled and still. You were Judge Armitage's secretary, Wolfe began. Describe your duties. I handled correspondence, scheduling, and record-keeping for his private affairs. Record-keeping, Wolfe repeated. Did those duties include maintaining ledgers? She hesitated then. Yes, but not those ledgers. I saw them once. Years ago, they weren't financial. They were moral. That made me lean in. Define moral. She glanced at the son, who nodded faintly. They contained names of judges and notes about decisions, who had been lenient, who harsh, who favored certain counsel. It was his way of watching fairness. An index of conscience, Wolfe said. How edifying. And who knew of these records? Only his wife. She typed most of them. The son turned sharply. My mother. Miss Case nodded. She was devoted to him, but she disapproved of his methods. She said justice wasn't something you measured. It was something you prayed for. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. And after her death, he sealed the room. Yes, he said it was a monument to folly. Until someone reopened it, I added. Recently, her voice cracked. I didn't go in there. I wouldn't. Nobody said you did, I told her. But someone did, and that someone left notes typed on your brand of machine. Her eyes widened. My typewriter, but I— She stopped, realizing the trap. It was stolen from my office last week. I thought one of the clerks borrowed it. The son's jaw set. Why didn't you tell the police? I didn't want to add to the scandal. Your father would have hated it. Wolfe leaned forward a fraction. Miss Case, consider the sequence. The typewriter vanishes. Fresh notes appear in the hidden room. Then your employer dies by a revolver, not of despair, but of orchestration. Who, besides yourself and the judge, had access to your office? Her breath shortened. One of the clerks. Mr. Brandt. He'd been dismissed last month for tampering with files. I scribbled it down. Tampering? What kind of files? Case records. He said he was correcting them. Where does he live? I asked. She hesitated. In the city, a rooming house near 42nd. I have the address. Good, Wolfe said. Archie, you will visit him discreetly. Take Mr. Panzer if he can be spared from records. Ascertain whether Mr. Brandt still occupies his room and whether his typewriter bears the appropriate gilt. He turned his gaze to the son. Meanwhile, you will remain available. I expect further illumination within the day. The man rose, his grief now sharpened into something that could cut. If Brandt had anything to do with this, You will refrain, Wolfe said dryly. Leave vengeance to amateurs. They went out together, Miss Case whispering apologies he didn't hear. When the door closed, Wolfe finally exhaled. Archie, he said, we pursue the author, not the executioner. One writes the lies, the other obeys them. Find which one Brandt was. I nodded, grabbed my coat and headed for the city. The rain had turned thin again, but I had a feeling the next room I entered would be thick with answers, if they didn't choke me first. The cab dropped me a block from the rooming house on 42nd, a place so narrow it looked like it had been squeezed into existence between two arguments. The street smelled of wet newspapers and boiled ambition. Saul was already there, leaning against a lamp-post with his hat low enough to look anonymous even in daylight. "Room 16, he said before I spoke. "Brandt's name still on the register, paid up through next week." "Any movement?" "Window shades half drawn. Somebody smoking inside. Cheap tobacco. Steady rhythm. Not nervous yet. Let's see if we can improve his mood." The desk clerk downstairs was the kind of man who kept secrets for a living, but not cheaply. I left a 5 on the counter, and his mouth loosened like an overworked hinge. "Mr. Brandt's in," he said. "Don't say I told you." We climbed 2 flights. The hall smelled of cooking oil and loneliness. I knocked twice, firm enough to sound official, not friendly enough to invite delay. Footsteps approached, then stopped. A shadow moved under the door crack. "Brandt," I said. "My name's Goodwin. I'd like to talk." The pause, stretched thin before the knob turned. The man who opened the door had the look of a clerk who'd misplaced more than files. Thin, balding, skin pale from too much paper and not enough daylight. "What about?" he asked, voice flat. "About a missing typewriter. Yours, I think. And a dead judge you worked for." His eyes flicked past me to Saul, who could make silence look dangerous. "I don't know anything about any judge." "Then we'll start small," I said, stepping past him before he could object. "Tell me why you've been borrowing machines from ladies' offices without permission." He moved toward the door, but Saul blocked it with the grace of a bear closing a refrigerator. Brandt's room was as depressing as expected. Narrow bed, a table cluttered with papers, an ashtray overflowing with evidence, and on the table, the prize itself, a royal typewriter with ribbon stains like a crime scene. "Well," I said, "either you're sentimental or careless." He swallowed hard. "That's mine. Generous of you to admit it. I'm curious what you've been typing lately. Philosophical quotations, maybe?" He blinked. "What?" I pulled the scrap from my pocket, the note found in Armitage's secret room. "Recognize the handiwork?" He stared at it too long. The lie was forming, then dying before it left his mouth. "Someone paid me," he said finally. "I don't know his name." "Describe him." "Middle-aged, expensive coat. Came to my office last month. Said he needed a few pages retyped from dictation. Gave me the text and $20. Said to destroy the originals. I didn't. They're there." He gestured toward a stack of paper on the shelf. I thumbed through them, 3 sheets typed in the same style as the notes we'd found, each one bearing the same peculiar phrasing, pronouncements about justice, corruption, and debt. Saul watched him narrowly. "He give you any reason why he wanted them done on that specific machine?" Brandt hesitated. "He said the ribbon carried the right impression." I didn't ask what that meant. "Smart," I said. "Asking questions is hazardous work." "Look," he said quickly. "I didn't know about the judge until I read the papers this morning. I never went near his house, I swear it." "That's encouraging," I told him. "But you'll forgive me for wanting Wolfe's confirmation." Saul picked up the typewriter and set it in a brown paper bag he'd brought for groceries or evidence. Same thing, in his world. Brandt's eyes widened. "You can't just—" "I can," Saul said, and did. We left him sweating in the doorway. Out on the street, the rain had started again, as punctual as a conscience. We caught a cab and headed back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in conference with a plate of veal when we arrived. He looked up, disapproving not of our speed but of our timing. "You return at luncheon. The gods must enjoy." Irony. "Lunch can wait," I said, setting the typewriter on his desk. "Meet Exhibit A." He adjusted his glasses, studying it like a specimen of inferior logic. "And Mr. Brandt?" "Still alive, though disappointed." Saul filled him in with professional brevity, omitting adjectives but including every verb that mattered. Wolfe listened, chewing methodically, then dabbed his lips. "So," he said, "we have a messenger, unwitting perhaps, used to fabricate threats. The text dictated by an unknown intermediary who possesses both money and knowledge of Judge Armitage's past." "Could be someone from that ledger list," I said. "Maybe one of the names who didn't want the archives reopened." "Or one who wanted them exposed," Wolfe murmured. "Anonymity serves both guilt and virtue equally well." He turned to Saul. "You will compare the typed pages with the earlier notes. I expect identical alignment and pressure. Report within the hour." Saul nodded, tucked the bag under his arm, and left as if the door owed him obedience. Wolfe leaned back. "Archie, telephone Miss Case. Inquire whether she knows of any recent visitors to the courthouse or to the judge's chambers, especially those seeking old case records." I dialed. Her voice came through tight but composed. "Miss Case speaking. Goodwin here. You've got a minute?" "Yes." "Did your late employer receive any visitors recently? Men in expensive coats with vague purposes?" She hesitated. "One, yes. A week ago. He asked to see the judge privately. He didn't give a name, but he left a calling card blank, except for a quotation." "Let me guess," I said. "Something philosophical?" "Yes. It said, 'Justice delayed is control maintained.' The judge kept it on his desk for a day, then burned it." "Did you notice the man's face?" "Only partly. Gray hair, trimmed beard, a scar near the mouth. He spoke softly. Too softly for a lawyer." I jotted it down. "You're sure you've never seen him before?" "I'm sure," she said, and I could hear her voice tremble for the first time. "Mr. Goodwin, do you think my typewriter was used to frame me?" "I think whoever borrowed it wanted you in the picture, but out of the shot." She didn't answer. I promised Wolfe would call her and hung up. He was watching me, fingertips steepled. "A scar near the mouth," he repeated. "Curious detail. That belongs to former District Attorney Calloway. Retired, disgraced, but not penitent." "Names in the ledger?" "Prominently," Wolfe said. "His misdeeds were legend. If those records resurfaced, his ruin would be permanent. Therefore, if the ledgers are missing, he either reclaimed them or ensured their destruction." I said, "So we have a judge murdered, a secretary framed, and a bitter ex-prosecutor with both motive and typing skills." Wolfe nodded. "Fetch Kramer. Tell him we have a name worth his time. But do not disclose the ledgers yet. Let him circle curiosity before we grant direction." "On my way," I said, grabbing my coat. He stopped me with a small gesture. "Archie?" "Yeah?" "If Mr. Calloway senses pursuit, he may act again. Caution is advisable." I grinned. "I'll bring a spare conscience just in case." The rain had thickened to needles when I stepped outside. Somewhere in the city, a man with a scar and an expensive coat was writing his own idea of justice, and I had the unpleasant task of proofreading it. The precinct's front desk looked like it had been carved from impatience. I asked for Kramer, and the sergeant behind the counter gave me a look that could sterilize metal. He jerked a thumb toward the glass door at the end of the hall. Inside, Kramer was in mid-explosion. "Goodwin," he barked the second he saw me. "If this is another of Wolfe's social calls—" "It's a business call," I said, closing the door behind me. "And it comes with a present, a name you'll want before it disappears behind a first-class lawyer." He sat back, cigar twitching. "Go on." "Calloway. Former DA. You remember him, made a hobby out of hanging juries and congratulating himself." The cigar paused mid-air. "Calloway. He's been out of the game for years. Retired from prosecution, not ambition. He's been visiting judges lately. Private visits, including Armitage." Kramer's jaw worked the cigar. "You've got proof?" "Wolfe's working on that. We found a trail, typed notes, same font as the ones left for Armitage, same philosophical mumbo-jumbo, all traced to a typewriter stolen from the judge's secretary. Brent, an ex-clerk, says a man matching Calloway's description paid him to type copies of those notes. The ledgers are missing. The judge is dead. You do the math. Kramer blew smoke like punctuation. If Wolfe's right, Calloway's setting up a blackmail chain. Or burning one down. Depends whether he's paying debts or collecting them. He rubbed his forehead. Where's Brent now? At his rooming house, still shaking. Wolfe thought you'd want him delivered warm. Kramer pushed himself up. Get him here. If he's talking, I'll make it official. I'll bring him. But first, you got any tail on Calloway? Kramer scored. Not yet. He's slippery. Keeps to himself on the east side, some penthouse he bought when he still had a conscience. I'll send a car. You might want two, I said. If Wolfe's right, he won't go down politely. Neither do you, he said, and that passed for thanks. I left, caught a cab, and headed back toward the brownstone. The rain had thinned to mist, the kind that sneaks onto your coat instead of falling on it. Wolfe was where he always was, rooted behind the desk, a fortress of calm and calories. Kramer's on it, I said. He's sending cars for Calloway and Brant, but I get the feeling he wants you to stay out of it. Then he shall be disappointed, Wolfe said. Have you noticed, Archie, that men who declare ownership of an investigation rarely possess the intelligence to justify it? I've noticed men who think they do, I said. But what's the angle? Calloway couldn't have written those ledgers. No, but he may have commissioned them or feared them. He leaned back, eyes half closed. Those records, if authentic, detailed judicial compromise from 3 decades past. Suppose Calloway collected them while district attorney, using them as both whip and shield. When his influence waned, he sought to reclaim or destroy them before they fell into younger hands. And Armitage had them. Indeed, the judge may have believed he'd buried them with his wife's belongings, but someone, Calloway, rediscovered their location, perhaps through Miss Case, perhaps through Brant. The rest is arithmetic. Except for one thing, I said. Armitage hired us to find whoever entered that room. He didn't mention Calloway by name. Why not? Wolfe opened his eyes. Because he did not know, or refused to believe, that Calloway was alive in his shadow again. The phone rang before I could answer. I picked it up. A male voice, sharp and precise. This is Brant. Brant! You must be feeling bold. Kramer's on his way to pick you up. I won't be here, he said. Listen carefully. The man who paid me, he called again an hour ago, told me to pack up and leave town tonight. He said he'd send money and a ticket. You still have that note? Right here. Where are you now? In my room. Stay put, I said. Don't open the door for anyone who doesn't smell like cigars and homicide. Understand? He hesitated. He said if I talk, I'll be found like the judge. I didn't get a chance to reassure him. There was a muffled sound like the receiver brushing cloth, then a low grunt, a scrape, and silence. Brant. Nothing. I dropped the phone. Wolfe, he's gone dead. Brant's line. Wolfe's voice sharpened. Address. 42nd. Room 16. Go. That was enough for me. I was out the door before Fritz could protest about umbrellas. The cab I flagged nearly lost its wheels getting there. The clerk downstairs was gone. The hallway upstairs smelled of smoke and something worse. I kicked Brant's door once. It swung open without complaint. The lamp lay on its side, throwing a drunk circle of light. Brant was face down near the bed, one arm bent under him, the typewriter ribbon from his replacement machine wound around his throat. The paper still in the roller read only one line. Justice balances by weight, not by worth. It was signed in fresh ink, with a neat initial. C. I checked for a pulse I knew wasn't there and backed away. A creak came from the fire escape. I moved to the window, in time to see a figure in a long coat disappearing into the alley below. The streetlight caught the brief flash of something pale near the mouth. A scar. I went for the stairs, but he was fast. By the time I reached the alley, the only thing left was exhaust and the smell of rain on iron. I called Kramer from the nearest corner phone. "He's dead," I said. "Brandt, strangled. And your boy Calloway just took a bow." Kramer's voice erupted in my ear. "You sure? Unless someone else borrowed his scar, get those cars rolling now." I hung up, knowing I'd bought Wolfe another migraine and Kramer another ulcer. When I got back, Wolfe hadn't moved, but his expression was taut as wire. "You found him." "Dead. Calloway's signature on the typewriter." "Literally." Wolfe's head inclined an inch. "He ties up his affairs with efficiency. That is both inconvenient and instructive." "What now?" "Now, Archie, we draw him out. He will assume Kramer suspects him but cannot prove it. Therefore, he will wish to negotiate his safety. Such men invariably seek the one mind they believe capable of appreciating their intellect." "Meaning you?" "Meaning me," Wolfe said. "Send him word. An invitation couched as understanding. Tell him I wish to discuss mutual interests. Use phrasing precise enough to flatter but vague enough to conceal intent. And if he shows up—" "He will," Wolfe said, reaching for his beer. "Ego, Archie, is the most reliable chauffeur to confession." The rain outside hit harder, like punctuation on a confession yet unwritten. Somewhere across the city, a man with a scar and a taste for philosophy was deciding whether to accept an invitation to meet the only man clever enough to ruin him. Wolfe's idea of sending word involved me doing the dirty work and him composing the bait. He dictated from his chair as if drafting a treaty, his tone pure diplomacy with an undertone of trapdoor. "Mr. Calloway," he began, "recent events have created confusion between intent and justice. I believe we might reconcile them privately before public misunderstanding widens the rift. I invite you to my office tonight at 9 o'clock, where mutual discretion will serve us both." He paused, gestured for me to punctuate it with his usual flourish. "Nero Wolfe," and handed me the envelope. "Deliver it yourself. It must carry the weight of authenticity." "Meaning he has to think you're extending an olive branch, not a subpoena." "Precisely. And Archie, ensure the olive branch is seen from a safe distance. I do not wish it returned by bullet." I grinned. "You're always the optimist." The cab I took east reeked of tobacco and rainwater. Calloway's building was everything you'd expect from a man who liked expensive gilt. Polished brass, a doorman whose vocabulary consisted of 3 suspicious syllables, and a lobby where mirrors worked overtime. "I've got a delivery for Mr. Calloway," I told the doorman, flashing Wolfe's envelope like it carried diplomacy rather than dynamite. He eyed me, decided I wasn't worth frisking, and pointed to the elevator. "17th floor, but he ain't fond of surprises." "Then we're evenly matched," I said, and rode up. The elevator doors opened into a hallway that smelled of wax and old law books. The apartment door bore a brass plate, M.J. Calloway. I knocked once. The lock clicked almost immediately. Calloway was taller than I'd expected, his gray hair trimmed to precision, his mouth tight enough to explain the scar. He wore a dark suit that might have been stitched from old verdicts. "Goodwin," he said without question. His voice was cultured sandpaper. "I wondered when your employer would stop watching from the sidelines." "I don't watch, I narrate," I said. "Mr. Wolfe requests your presence this evening at 9. He wants to talk before the newspapers do." He took the envelope without reading it. "You think I'm afraid of newspapers? I think you're smart enough to prefer headlines with smaller print." His eyes narrowed, but something in the way his fingers tapped the envelope told me he'd already made the decision to come. "Tell Mr. Wolfe I value conversation, but I value privacy more. If the police appear, I won't." "Understood." Wolfe's not in the habit of sharing guests with Kramer. "Good," he said, and closed the door without a handshake. I was halfway back down the hall when I heard the faint scratch of a phonograph starting inside. Something classical, slow, self-important. Men like Calloway always needed a soundtrack. The rain was starting again when I returned to the brownstone. Wolfe hadn't moved except to replace an empty beer bottle with a full one. "He'll come," I said. 9 o'clock, and he's expecting discretion, not a reception committee. "Excellent," Wolfe murmured. "Then we shall give him precisely that." "Want me to alert Kramer?" "Not yet. Let him arrive when the trap requires weight, too early, and the prey bolts." I dropped into my chair. "You planning to corner him with logic or shove him down a moral flight of stairs?" "Logic," Wolfe said, "is the higher cruelty." Fritz appeared to clear the lunch dishes, giving me a look that said this particular guest list didn't please him. Wolfe ignored it. His gaze drifted toward the rain-streaked window. "Calloway is not merely guilty, Archie. He is proud. Pride simplifies interrogation. He will arrive believing himself the most intelligent man in the room. I'll make sure he enjoys that illusion until it hurts." The clock's hands did their slow dance toward 9. The brownstone settled into the kind of silence you could hear thinking. Wolfe sat motionless behind his desk, half-shadowed, the lamp glow carving out the stubborn geometry of his face. At 8:53, the doorbell rang. Fritz opened it and stepped aside without a word. Calloway entered like a man expecting applause. The smell of wet wool and cologne followed him in. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, eyes taking in the room's symmetry. "I appreciate a man who respects order." "I respect necessity," Wolfe replied. "Please sit." Calloway sat, but not fully. His posture remained half-ready, the kind of balance men keep when they suspect they'll need to stand suddenly. I took the red chair across from him, my notebook closed, but my hand near the drawer where Wolfe kept his revolver. Wolfe spoke first. "You have taken great pains to address the judiciary's moral balance. The letters, the quotations, the elaborate masquerade of conscience. I admire your zeal, though not your method." Calloway's smile barely moved. "I simply believe truth deserved a curator. Corruption doesn't die, it just changes its stationery." "Ah," Wolfe said, "so you preserved its correspondence. How noble. Yet I wonder, did your preservation extend to blackmail?" Calloway's gaze flicked toward me, then back. "You've been listening to frightened people, Mr. Wolfe, judges who bought peace with silence. My interest was archival, not mercenary." Wolfe leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Archival interests seldom result in strangled clerks." That cracked the polish. His jaw tightened, a small pulse jumping near the scar. "Brant was a fool. He talked to the wrong ears." "You admit contact, then?" Wolfe said softly. Calloway's mouth thinned. "I hired him for typing, nothing more." "And Judge Armitage?" A pause long enough to grow weeds. "He found the ledgers. He wanted to turn them into the authorities, to clear the air, as he said. I tried to persuade him that the past deserved burial. He disagreed. I left him alive." "Convenient omission," I said. He turned to me with a thin smile. "Goodwin, I imagine you've shot men before. When one's reputation is on trial, self-preservation is a legal defense." Wolfe's voice dropped an octave. "You mistake reputation for justice. One is borrowed, the other is earned." Calloway rose slightly, one hand on the envelope he'd brought with him. "I didn't come for lectures. I came to propose an understanding." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "And what form would that take?" "The ledgers," Calloway said. "I know where they are. You'll ensure their silence, and mine, by convincing your friend Kramer that Armitage's death was suicide. In exchange, the records vanish forever." I said, "That's a generous offer. Blackmail wrapped in cooperation." He ignored me, eyes locked on Wolfe. "You're a man of intellect. You know the difference between guilt and futility. Those books destroy more than they correct." Wolfe's lips curved, not into a smile, but something colder. "You are mistaken, sir. What destroys is concealment. Those ledgers will speak." if only through me. For the first time, Calloway's composure cracked. "You won't live to publish them," he said quietly. I was already moving before his hand reached inside his coat. The motion was quick, but not quicker than habit. My gun came up, and the sharp command in my voice stopped him halfway. "Don't," I said. He froze. The hand emerged empty except for a folded paper. "A letter," he said. "For Kramer. Insurance." I took it, but kept the gun steady. Wolfe's voice came calm and final. "Sit down, Mr. Calloway. If you value intellect, you will find that surrender requires more of it than violence." He hesitated, then obeyed, his pride fighting gravity. Wolfe pressed the buzzer for Fritz. "Telephone Lieutenant Kramer," he said. "Tell him our guest has arrived and insists on remaining." The look Calloway gave Wolfe could have filed steel. "You think this ends with an arrest?" "No," Wolfe said, folding his hands. "It ends with punctuation. The law writes sentences. I prefer full stops." The room held still, the only sound the rain against the window, steady, deliberate, and unrelenting, just like justice catching up with its ghost. Calloway didn't blink when Wolfe pressed the buzzer again, though his fingers curled slightly on the arm of the chair as Fritz's voice came faintly from the hall, announcing that Lieutenant Kramer was on his way up. Wolfe inclined his head in acknowledgement but didn't look away from the man across the desk. "You see, Mr. Calloway," he said, voice smooth as polished oak, "this house enjoys punctual law enforcement. It saves us both from unpleasant improvisation." Calloway's mouth thinned. "You mistake this for fear, Wolfe. I've been in rooms where truth meant prison. This isn't one of them." "Yet," I said. He turned those cold eyes on me, gray like rainwater over stone. "You think I killed the judge because he found my archive? You're wrong. I killed him because he refused to let go of it." That earned a sound from Wolfe that might have been a sigh, or the prelude to thunder. "Ah," he murmured. "So confession is fashionable again." Calloway's lips curled. "Don't flatter yourself. I didn't come to confess. I came to negotiate. But you forced my hand. The ledgers were written by Armitage's wife. Every entry, every name, hers. He discovered them only after she died. After she discovered me." He leaned forward, the scar at his mouth stretching with a smile that wasn't one. "She and I shared a conviction, Wolfe. Justice should be accountable. But she wanted revelation. I wanted reform. We kept those records as leverage. To clean the courts, not soil them. When she died, he sealed them away to bury us both." Wolfe's voice dropped, soft but unrelenting. "And when he reopened that tomb, you feared resurrection." "I feared misuse," Calloway said sharply. "Armitage was old, vain, sentimental. He wanted absolution, not consequence. He would have handed those records to the newspapers. That ledger was a lit fuse, and I snuffed it. By murder." Calloway met Wolfe's gaze without flinching. "By necessity. I gave him the chance to burn them himself. He refused. So I made sure he'd never light another match." I had the drawer half open before Wolfe's hand rose slightly, enough to tell me to hold. He was studying Calloway with something close to pity, which on Wolfe looked like intellectual curiosity dipped in disdain. "You've mistaken control for justice," Wolfe said, "and vanity for wisdom." "You'd understand neither," Calloway shot back. "You sit here solving puzzles while men like me rot under them." "Rot is self-inflicted," Wolfe said quietly, "and often aromatic." Calloway's laugh was dry, but it cracked on the edges. "You think you've won. Kramer will take me, the papers will shout my name, and you'll dine in triumph. But those ledgers, you'll never see them." Wolfe's brows rose. "Then enlighten me, sir. Where are they?" Calloway's smile returned, slow and terrible. "Safe. Where they belong. In the judge's coffin." That made even me pause. "You mean buried?" He turned his gaze toward me, calm again. He prepared his own penance. The ledgers were sealed inside before the funeral arrangements were made. By now they're halfway to dust. Convenient, I said. Too convenient. He shrugged. Truth usually is. The knock came before I could reply. Fritz opened the door for Kramer, who entered like a storm that had been waiting for permission. His eyes swept the room, found Calloway, then me. "So the philosopher's here," he said. "Figures I'd find him sitting pretty instead of running." Calloway didn't rise. "Running implies guilt. I prefer inevitability." Kramer grunted. "You'll have plenty of time to write poetry about it. You're under arrest for the murders of Judge Armitage and Samuel Brandt." "Don't flatter yourself, Lieutenant," Calloway said. "You don't have enough proof." Kramer's face twisted into something between a grin and a snarl. "We've got witnesses, motive, and now a confession. That's enough for me." "Confession?" Calloway asked, arching a brow toward Wolfe. Wolfe's tone was serene. "I believe your exact words were, 'I killed him because he refused to let go of it.' Shall I have Archie repeat them under oath?" Kramer stepped forward. "Save your energy. You can recite it downtown." Calloway rose then, slowly, as though his bones were tired of carrying his principles. "Do you have any idea what you're burying, Lieutenant? Those ledgers, what they contain. Your own badge might glow in their reflection." Kramer's jaw tightened. "I'll take that chance. Let's go." For a moment I thought Calloway would resist. His eyes moved, between Wolfe and Kramer, weighing pride against futility. Then he reached for the envelope he'd carried in, the one addressed to Kramer, and handed it over. "Consider that my closing argument," he said. "When you read it, you'll understand why justice never sleeps. It just changes keepers." Kramer took the envelope and jerked his head toward the door. "Goodwin, come along. I want you to sign a statement on this conversation." I glanced at Wolfe, who gave the faintest nod. "I'll meet you there," I said. When they'd gone, Kramer, Fritz, and the philosopher in cuffs, the brownstone felt heavier. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with that washed metal smell that always follows a storm. Wolfe sat motionless, eyes closed, fingertips touching. "Think he told the truth about the ledgers?" I asked. "He told the truth," Wolfe said. "Not necessarily the one that matters." I crossed to the window, watching the cab that carried Calloway vanish into the slick streetlight. "If they really are buried with Armitage, that's going to make Kramer's paperwork poetic." Wolfe grunted. "Kramer will unearth him before dawn. The man's appetite for dirt exceeds his discretion." "Suppose he finds them," I said. "What then?" "Then, Archie, the judiciary will tremble, the newspapers will foam, and men who once shook hands in courtrooms will avoid mirrors for a decade." He opened his eyes then, and there was something there, satisfaction tempered with a kind of reluctant sorrow. "But the true victory," he said, "is that justice, however maligned, will have spoken without my having to shout for it." That was as close as Wolfe ever came to poetry. I left him there with his beer and his conscience, both of which he managed to refill regularly. Outside, the night felt less like an ending and more like an intermission. The city had the quiet of something plotting its next argument. Somewhere, in a grave being reopened under official lights, a box waited with the names of the guilty pressed between its pages. And if Calloway was right, the dead judge was keeping them company, making sure no one, living or otherwise, rewrote the verdict. The phone rang less than an hour after Kramer's cab vanished. Wolfe didn't stir. He'd settled into that half-conscious state where his mind went roaming through logic while the rest of him stayed anchored in the chair. I picked it up. "Goodwin." "This is Kramer." His voice had that extra rasp that came from too much rain and too little patience. "You can tell His Majesty I've been digging up his prophecy, literally. The ledgers were in the coffin, wrapped in oilcloth, neat as you please. Our philosopher wasn't lying." "That's a refreshing first," I said. You planning to send Wolfe a thank you card or just a subpoena? He ignored that. We're at the cemetery now. The county coroner's furious. The press is already sniffing. Around and Calloway's clammed up tight. Says the books speak for themselves. They do, I said. You just have to know which language guilt uses. Kramer grunted. Tell Wolfe to keep out of it now. I've got more dead reputations than I can count, and I don't need his ego helping identify them. Too late, I said. His ego's a self-starter. I hung up and turned toward Wolfe. He opened his eyes before I could speak. So, he said, the dead have been exhumed and the living embarrassed. You could say that. The ledgers were real, the coffin story true, and Kramer's pride is about to need embalming. Wolfe made a sound halfway between disgust and satisfaction. The man's intellect is proportionate to his belt size, expansive, but often misused. He reached for the phone himself, dialed with the deliberate precision of a hangman tightening the knot. Miss Case, he said when she answered, you may cease worrying. The records have been recovered. They will implicate many, but not you. The forgery surrounding your machine will be acknowledged as such. Her relief spilled through the line like steam escaping a kettle. Then it's over. For some, Wolfe said. For others, it has only begun. Sleep well, Miss Case. He hung up before she could reply and leaned back, fingers steepled. Archie, the distinction between guilt and consequence is seldom chronological. The law will now devour its own. I pulled up a chair. You sound like you're writing the obituary for decency. Merely its resume, he said dryly. Our part is complete, but understanding it remains a duty. The front bell rang, sharp and insistent. Fritz appeared, eyebrows broadcasting disapproval. Lieutenant Kramer, sir. Wolfe sighed. Admit him. Bring beer. Kramer entered with the subtlety of an avalanche. His coat was wet, his expression wetter. You couldn't have warned me, he barked. You had to sit up here polishing your smugness while I dug corpses in the rain. I did not compel you to exhume anyone, Wolfe said mildly. I merely predicted your zeal. Yeah, well, your prediction's about to make the city bleed. Half those names in the ledgers are still wearing robes. There's even one federal judge on the list. Then I congratulate you, Wolfe said. You found more truth in a grave than most men find in life. Kramer's hand flattened on the desk. You're enjoying this? Hardly. Scandal is tedious. It reduces complexity to appetite. I intervened before Kramer's pulse got promoted. What about Calloway, still keeping his mouth shut? He's talking now, Kramer said grimly. Just not the way you want. Claims he's a patriot. Says he cleaned the system, that he only killed to preserve balance. If he thought he could get away with it, he'd have built a statue to himself. Wolfe's lips twitched. He already did. Its foundation was arrogance, and its pedestal, justification. Kramer shot me a look. You see why I hate coming here? Every time he opens his mouth, I feel like I walked into Sunday school for sociopaths. I shrugged. You keep coming back. Because he's right too often. That earned him a small grunt of acknowledgement from Wolfe. Then accept this, Lieutenant. Calloway's guilt will be obvious, but his intention will tempt sympathy. Do not let sentiment obscure culpability. Don't worry, Kramer said. I left sympathy in the trunk of the car, but those ledgers, God help us. You realize what happens when this hits the press? Yes, Wolfe said. A dozen judges will resign, 5 will protest, 2 will pretend innocence, and all will be equally correct. Kramer let out a low breath. You make cynicism sound like philosophy. It is, Wolfe said. Philosophy with empirical support. He reached for his beer, sipped, then added, You may tell your superiors the case is closed as far as I am concerned. Justice has had its meal. Whether it digests properly is your department. Kramer stared at him, then shook his head. One of these days, Wolfe, your tongue's going to earn its own indictment. Not if you continue protecting it. Wolfe replied smoothly. Kramer snorted, turned to me. You get the fun part. Writing this up for him, I bet? I'll make it sound like everyone behaved with grace, I said. Then it'll be fiction, he said, and left without another word. The silence that followed wasn't the peaceful kind. It was thick, loaded, and a little tired. Wolfe stared at the door as though the noise Kramer left behind had scratched the air. Archie, he said finally, the moral appetite of this republic grows no leaner. I'll add that to your memoirs, I said. What do you want me to do with my notes? File them under public tragedies, private idiocies. I poured myself a drink from the sideboard, the kind of rye that made honesty optional. You realize, I said, you just helped the law dig up its own conscience. That has to sting a little. It gratifies me instead, Wolfe said. Pain is transient. Truth, regrettably, is not. He reached for another beer, the gesture final. We are done, Archie. Let the world handle its shame without our assistance. But the world wasn't done yet. The phone rang again, a short, urgent trill that sliced through the calm like a verdict delivered early. I picked it up. Goodwin, a female voice whispered, breathless. This is Miss Case. You told me to rest, but I can't. There's something you need to know. The ledgers weren't complete. That got Wolfe's attention. His eyes opened wider than I'd seen all evening. Explain, I said. There was a 12th book, she said. Mrs. Armitage kept it separate. Personal notes, names of men who weren't judges. Politicians, donors, police officials. It's missing. Wolfe straightened, his tone turning to steel. Miss Case, are you certain? Yes. I saw her writing in it once. A red ledger, not black like the others. Where is it now? I asked. I don't know, but if Calloway had it, he didn't destroy it. He wanted it hidden, and someone else wants it now. I just got a call from a man who said he'll pay for any pages still in my possession. Did you recognize the voice? Wolfe asked. No, but he knew my name. Stay where you are, I said. Lock your doors and wait for me. Wolfe nodded once, grimly. Go, Archie, and take Mr. Panzer if you can find him. The case, it seems, refuses to end with propriety. I grabbed my coat. You were right, as usual. About what? He asked. That the dead only sleep until justice rolls over. The door shut behind me into the damp night, and the city exhaled like a tired witness preparing to lie again. The street outside smelled of rain and electricity, the kind of air that holds its breath before something happens. I flagged the first cab that hadn't forgotten how to stop and gave the driver Miss Case's address. He tried to make conversation about the weather, but I wasn't interested in small talk unless it came with clues. Her apartment building stood on a quiet block off Madison, one of those post-war boxes that looked like it had been designed by accountants. The lobby light flickered, buzzing like it was trying to confess something. I buzzed her number, got silence, then the faint click of a receiver being lifted. Who is it? Goodwin. Wolfe sent me. You still in one piece? A pause. I think so. I've been sitting by the phone since I called. No one's been here. Keep it that way. She let me in, and I climbed 2 flights that smelled of damp carpet and caution. When she opened her door, she looked smaller than she had in Wolfe's office, but her eyes had the fixed shine of someone past exhaustion. Where's Saul? She asked, trailing a lead. I came ahead. Her apartment was neat except for the coffee table, which had been turned into a war map. Papers, envelopes, and an open notebook with handwriting that tried too hard to be tidy. On top of it lay a half-burned cigarette that had forgotten its owner. Let me guess, I said, nodding at the mess. Packing or panicking? Neither, as remembering. I kept copies of some of Mrs. Armitage's shorthand notes. I thought they were sentimental. Now I think they were warnings. She handed me a page. The handwriting was hers, but copied from another, cramped lines in fountain pen blue. I read aloud the line that mattered. If they take the red book, they take the city. That's poetic, I said. Any idea what it means? She shook her head. Mrs. Armitage wrote that after one of Calloway's visits. She said the red ledger was her protection. I thought it was a metaphor. Most people don't get strangled over metaphors, I said. Where would she have kept it? She kept everything personal in the house, except that. She told me once that certain truths couldn't live under the same roof as marriage. That narrowed it down to anywhere else on the planet. I was about to press her when a sound from the hallway cut me short. A creak, then a soft tap, like someone testing patience instead of wood. She froze. I put a finger to my lips, crossed to the door, and glanced through the peephole. The corridor was empty except for the flickering light and a shadow that didn't belong to the walls. Get away from the door, I whispered. The next second, the lock turned. Not jimmied, not forced, turned. Whoever was outside had a key. The door swung in slow, deliberate motion. A man stepped through, tall, sharp shoulders under a trench coat, his hand buried in the pocket where bad news usually lives. His face was narrow, eyes colorless in the dim light. "Miss Case," he said softly. "You've been busy." I didn't move. "She's got company. State your business before it becomes a problem." He ignored me, gaze fixed on her. "You were told not to keep copies." Her voice trembled. "Who are you?" He smiled slightly. "An assistant to people who don't like exposure?" I said. "Then you're in the wrong profession." His hand came out of the pocket, gun included. "Small caliber, big intentions. Mr. Goodwin, I presume. You and your employer have a habit of creating noise. I'm here to reduce it." I kept my tone casual, the way you do when there's a trigger in the room. "If that gun's your argument, you're already losing." He didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward the table, the papers, the notes. "Where's the red ledger?" "I don't have it," she said quickly. He took a slow step forward. "You had the copies. You had access. Don't insult me with ignorance." I moved between them, keeping my voice low. She said she doesn't have it. You're welcome to search the wallpaper. He raised the gun an inch. "Don't be noble, Mr. Goodwin. You don't wear it well." Before I could correct his manners, a sound cut through the tension, a floorboard creak from behind him. The man turned instinctively, and that was all Saul Panza needed. He came in from the kitchen door like an apology with elbows. The gun went off once, the bullet chewing plaster, and then Saul's arm clamped the man's wrist. Another twist, a dull thud, and the weapon skittered across the floor. I scooped it up while Saul introduced the man's head to the wall in a brief but persuasive negotiation. The intruder sagged. Saul breathed once, calmly. "You always start the party before I arrive?" "Just warming it up," I said. "He wanted the red ledger." Saul frowned. "Figures. He had a cab waiting outside. Driver left when I started up the stairs." I checked the man's pockets. Nothing but a folded card embossed with initials JH and a line of text that read, "Civic Council for Reform." Wolfe's voice came back to me from earlier. "The law will now devour its own." Miss Case sank into the sofa, pale. He said he'd come for it if I talked. "You kept your word," I said. "We'll handle the rest." I called Wolfe from her phone, keeping my eyes on the unconscious reformer. "Report," he said. "Your prediction's holding. A man with a reform club membership and bad manners just tried to collect Miss Case and the red book. Saul's got him subdued." "Alive?" "Breathing, though discouraged." "Good. Bring him here. And the lady, too. We'll require her recollection." I hung up, nodded to Saul. "Taxi for 3, and make sure our friend doesn't rediscover consciousness until Wolfe's ready to greet him." He smiled faintly. "I can manage that." The ride back felt longer than it was. Miss Case stared out the window, hands clenched around her purse like it contained a life sentence. The city lights smeared across the glass, turning everything into reflection and regret. When we reached the brownstone, Fritz's eyebrows nearly achieved flight at the sight of our cargo. Wolfe, however, was calm enough for all of us. He waited until Saul had deposited the guest in the red chair, wrists bound with my necktie, before speaking. "Miss Case, please sit. Mr. Goodwin, the weapon." I handed it over. Wolfe examined it as if judging a contestant at a very dull pageant. A Harrington .32, cheap, serviceable, impersonal, much like the organizations that employ them. The man groaned. Wolfe regarded him with clinical detachment. "Your employers have poor taste in instruments and worse in hirelings. Who are they?" The man's eyelids fluttered, but no sound came. Saul reached for the phone. "Want me to call Kramer?" "Not yet," Wolfe said. "I prefer to hear the confession before the applause." He turned to Miss Case. "You said Mrs. Armitage wrote in red ink. Do you recall the color of the binding?" "Yes, crimson leather with gold trim." "Then it will not be in the coffin. Calloway was too proud for ornament." He looked at me. "Archie, check the judge's library tomorrow, behind the volumes on moral philosophy. Vanity often conceals itself beside irony." I nodded, though the night wasn't over. The man in the chair stirred again, eyes unfocused. Wolfe leaned forward, voice smooth as a scalpel. "You may speak now, or you may listen later from a cell. Which serves you better?" The man swallowed. "You don't understand. The Red Ledger doesn't destroy corruption. It documents it for control. Everyone wants it. Calloway, the courts, the council." He coughed, grimaced. "And now you." Wolfe's gaze didn't waver. "Yes," he said softly. "Now me." The man in the chair had gone from defiant to drained. His tie-bound wrists twitched against the fabric, his mouth working to keep control of the narrative, but Wolfe had already stripped it from him, gently, methodically, like a surgeon who resented the patient for existing. "You will save your breath," Wolfe said. "You are a messenger, not a designer. The Red Ledger was never yours to wield, nor was its purpose what you imagine. You merely fetched fire for men who prefer their hands clean." The man's jaw tightened. "You think you know who they are?" "I know precisely who they are," Wolfe said. "You were sent by the Civic Council for Reform, a sanctimonious syndicate masquerading as virtue. Their founder, Mr. Harlan Vick, was once a clerk under Calloway. He inherited not conscience, but connections. When Calloway's career crumbled, Vick gathered the remnants and built himself a chapel of purity, funded by corruption. The Red Ledger, with its names and debts, was his holy relic." The man's face twitched, confirming it. Wolfe continued, "You were to retrieve the ledger before it could reach Kramer's hands. But you misunderstood one thing. Calloway was not protecting those men. He was blackmailing them, and they, fearing exposure, turned on their own keeper, hence your errand and your mistake." He gestured toward Saul, who tightened his grip on the man's shoulder like punctuation. Miss Case sat rigid on the couch, her eyes on Wolfe. "Then the Red Ledger really does exist?" "It exists," Wolfe said, "but not where anyone expects. Judge Armitage's wife was a woman of intelligence and irony. When she wrote that if they take the Red Book, they take the city, she meant it literally. The book was her insurance, but not her husband's. She entrusted it elsewhere, to someone who understood silence." "Who?" I asked. Wolfe turned those heavy-lidded eyes toward me. "Fritz." The name dropped like a pebble into still water. Fritz, who had stood quietly by the door all evening, blinked astonished. "Sir." "Years ago," Wolfe said, "you catered a judicial luncheon through a mutual acquaintance, Mrs. Armitage's cousin. You once told me she paid you in advance for a second event that never occurred. The payment was not money but a book. Crimson leather, gold trim. Fritz frowned, thinking, then slowly nodded. I remember. It was strange. She said it was a family keepsake. I put it in a wooden box for safekeeping. His face cleared with dawning realization. In the cellar, behind the wine racks. Wolfe gave a single, satisfied nod. Precisely. Kramer chose that moment to arrive, pounding on the door like truth demanding entry. I opened it and waved him in. Goodwin, he growled. You better have something worth missing dinner for. Always, I said, and motioned to Wolfe. He inclined his head toward the captive. Lieutenant, your counsel for reform has been using piety as camouflage. Their agent here attempted to retrieve a document capable of annihilating half the judiciary. You will find the evidence in my cellar. Crimson leather, gold-trimmed, handwritten by Mrs. Armitage. I suggest you guard it more carefully than the law guards its integrity. Kramer looked from Wolfe to the man, then back. You're serious? I am always serious, Wolfe said, but rarely solemn. Kramer exhaled, ran a hand over his face. If this pans out, the commissioner's going to faint. Then stand ready to catch him, Wolfe said. Saul handed the bound man over. Kramer cuffed him without ceremony, and the room's tension loosened by half. Miss Case looked near tears. What happens to me? She asked quietly. Wolfe turned to her, his tone gentler than usual. You will testify to truth, Miss Case, and then return to your life. The world will forget soon enough. It always does. She managed a small smile, the kind that survives only because it has to. When they'd all gone, the lieutenant, the prisoner, the echoes of official indignation, the brownstone returned to its natural rhythm. Stillness thick enough to cut. Wolfe remained seated, eyes on the doorway as if still watching Kramer's retreating back. I leaned against the desk. Well, that wraps it. Corruption, blackmail, murder, and civic hypocrisy, all tied up with a crimson bow. You should market this as a city-wide cleanse. Phooey, Wolfe muttered. The city will remain filthy. It only changes the odor. He reached for his beer, examined the glass as though the foam held jurisprudence. Calloway fancied himself a reformer, but reform without humility is merely revenge disguised as improvement. Mrs. Armitage understood that. Her ledger was not accusation, it was accountability. The difference, Archie, is subtle but vital. I grinned. I'll quote you in the papers. Don't you dare, he said, but the corners of his mouth twitched. Fritz reappeared from the kitchen, slightly flustered but triumphant, a small wooden box in his hands. You were right, sir. It was exactly where you said. He set it on the desk. Wolfe opened it carefully. Inside lay the red ledger, smaller than expected, edges worn, the faint scent of perfume clinging to the leather. He turned a page, scanned a line, then another. His face did not change, but I could tell the names were the kind that made history uncomfortable. He closed it firmly. Archie, lock this in the safe. It will go to Kramer tomorrow. Tonight, I prefer peace to justice. I did as told, spinning the dial until the past clicked shut behind steel. When I turned back, Wolfe was already leaning into his chair, eyes half closed, fingers steepled in quiet satisfaction. So that's it? I asked. No speech, no gloating, no philosophical exit. He opened one eye. Archie, the pleasure of intellect lies not in its proclamation, but its exercise. I have no need to announce what the facts already prove. I laughed softly. You and silence make a great team. He closed his eyes again. Then stop interrupting us. I went to the window. The rain had finally stopped, the city gleaming under the late lamps like a tired boxer catching its breath. Somewhere out there, a dozen guilty men were probably packing their bags, and a dozen honest ones were writing denials. But inside the brownstone, The only sound was Fritz in the kitchen and Wolfe's quiet contentment, an empire of logic restored to order. I poured myself a drink and raised it toward him. To justice, however it shows up. He didn't open his eyes. To intelligence, Archie, justice is only its shadow. The glass clinked against mine in imagination, and the case of the judge's secret room was finally closed.